Okay, hey guys, it's Minefield here, and I was thinking about the new video I'd make. I think since we finished our first campaign, I would do a quick video on the new Reaver Culture in Age of Wonders 4, so we'll try to talk about what this culture does, what its weaknesses might be, about its units, about the kind of build paths that you can take early on, and all this jazz. So we'll try to give you a good, quick overview of the culture in this video. So, the Reaver Culture comes with a lot of very cool, unique features, right? First of all, you will get the so-called War Spoils. War Spoils can be basically used like gold. You can use that to recruit certain units called Mage Lock Cannons, but this requires you to unlock your tier 3 city. You can also use that to actually negotiate with free cities and other players, which means that since you're this kind of warring culture, which we'll get to in a second, you will be able to use that for diplomacy. Then you can also use this for your unique mechanic, so your units come with a special combo. We'll talk about later, but you have a Harrier and an Overseer. You can use those two units to capture enemies. And then if you want to get them into your army, you'll be able to use War Spoils to do so, basically buying them into your stacks. So that's very useful as well, pretty solid mechanic. And it is this extra resource is awarded for basically fighting enemies who come from free cities or who come from enemy empires. So the earlier you get active on the map and the earlier you get into fighting, the better it is for you usually, and therefore you're also very unlikely to be making many friends among free cities, because you do want to kind of get the train rolling and get those war spoils. So let us perhaps now go to the unique mechanics of the Civ or of the culture that go beyond that, right? So you have total war, which means you can start wars with enemies without any additional consequences. So this means that, of course, you will upset other AIs, which is why you would be using War Spoils then to maybe find some allies among the other players. But at the very same time, you can actually go ahead and start wars with free cities and just conquer them, and nobody will be angry at you. So that is very useful, and it works quite well because then you can obviously accumulate more War Spoils, etc. So that's pretty cool. Then you also have this special thing called Focused Aggression, which means that basically your units have the ability to benefit more from marks, and you have a lot of extra abilities that were added to the game that will allow you to mark your enemies. So that's overall a very, very solid mechanic, and it's very synergistic, and it gives you a lot of extra damage throughput if you can actually mark your enemies a lot with different sources of marks. So that's pretty solid altogether, and your damage in the late game is going to be extremely high if you can play around this. So now it's time for a quick shameless plug. If you do enjoy this video, you think that's actually making sense, do consider subscribing to me on YouTube, giving me a follow on Twitch, twitch.tv/Mikefield. I do stream there very frequently. And finally, also comment below and tell me what you think. So, you might be wondering what the catch might be, right? Culture seems to be really strong on paper, so what exactly are we working with that makes our lives so difficult? So, first of all, we have two very, very weak units to start your game with. Harriers are skirmishers who have the ability to cast net, which is fairly low range. They have extremely low health as well. And honestly, overall, they don't quite pack a punch, right? So that's a very, very weak unit that is supposed to be your bread and butter. Then you have mercenaries, and again, they are just polearm units. They have the drive-back ability, which means that you can actually have fairly high baseline damage, even if you just have one action point. But altogether, it is, again, not the strongest ability of them all, and it's really universally kind of weak. I would not consider this unit really too special or too powerful. Then you have the Observer, which is the only scout in the game who cannot attack. It can have a mark, making your units hit harder, but overall, this means that there is a very visible gap in your, very basic lineup. You have no ranged units, you have no shield units, you have no support in the first tier, obviously no battle mages either, right? So that kind of usual playstyle of you having this kind of tanky front line and a backline that does damage is not really present here. So you will have to alleviate somewhat, right? You'll have to find another way of getting this to work, because the baseline is probably the weakest one you can have out of all the cultures in the game, right? So you have to find a way around this, or otherwise you'll have an extremely tough time early on. At least I really did. So, if you get to tier 2, things get really beautiful though, because you do have the Mage Locks, who are the musketeer units, and who cannot shoot and move at the same turn, but overall they provide you with a lot of damage output. They have a very, very strong basic attack, and they come with just massive amount of damage because they do also pierce armored units. So they're super strong at what they do, which is just damage. Overseers are your bread and butter for synergy, right? It's a very big shame they only come in tier 2 because they have the ability to essentially subdue, to heal, and to mark your enemies with their auto attacks. So they're a very nice synergistic unit, but as we've already established, they only come later. So your ability to subdue is actually really cool. So if you're able to, for instance, stun or immobilize your enemies, you are going to be able to capture those units and buy them with war spoils. There is a little caveat to it, however, because well, you need to have a way of doing so. You need to have a way of stunning them, immobilizing them, or freezing them. Fortunately, Harriers here with their netcast ability do provide that. So if you can find a way of getting a support unit early on into your lineup through your culture traits, you will have a very nice advantage early, and you'll be able to utilize that mechanic fairly early on, or you will be just able to disable enemies on the battlefield, which is also very, very cool, right? So doesn't matter if you do have war spoils or no, that combo of Overseers and Harriers is very potent, but as we've established, you need to have that support unit in your lineup on the very first turn if you really want to make use of this, because it's a very, very powerful combo, very, very early on especially. So if you can find a way of getting an Overseer in, that is going to be marvelous, right? But otherwise, that might pose some challenges. Now, going forward, you do have your tier 3 units, and again, we will have some small disappointments here. Dragoons are this kind of hit and run unit where you have the ability to attack and then you have the ability to move afterwards. They basically gain an extra action if they attack with their gun or if they attack in melee. That's very good, very cool on paper, but again, their damage output is not necessarily the highest, and at the very same time, they are fairly squishy for tier 3 units. So they're not your, cavalry units like Death Knights or something. They're actually significantly weaker than that, and that means that, they're, again, a skirm, right? You have another skirmisher unit, like you didn't have one from tier 1. And honestly, again, fairly disappointing in terms of what they do. So Harrying Shot is pretty decent because it can distract, meaning that you basically can treat your opponents as flanked, which is pretty cool, again, because we do have some extra synergies later that come with this. You can also pick a particular society trait that gives you that bonus to, or racial trait that gives you bonus to flanking damage. So that's a very, very good ability, but overall, again, Dragoons are super situational, so you'll have to build around that to make the most out of this. Finally, you have Magelock Cannons. That is the unit that you can buy with War Spoils, so even if you're short on gold, you can produce something. And that's a nice unit with an AoE auto attack, but again, it cannot move and shoot, so there is a very clear-cut limitation to what they do. So overall, again, a solid unit, but with some limitations, with some caveats, so you have to know how to play around this. So generally speaking, Reaver Culture is not the easiest one to play, therefore, I believe. Okay, so perhaps it's a good time to think about building your culture, right? So how do we actually start the game? What is going to really work very well for you if you're playing the Reavers? First of all, I would definitely say Keen-Sighted is great because your Magelocks, they do benefit from extra accuracy, right? They have really long range, but they also fall off. So if you can stack the Keen-Sighted and Marked, this will mean that your Magelocks are actually able to hit a lot more often and they're able to do a lot more damage. If you do happen to have a hero who does wield a musket as well, that's going to obviously give you some extra bonus too. So that is a very, very strong starting trait. The other one that I would say is good is the sneaky one, because if you can mark and distract an enemy, meaning that they are always flanked, right, you will get additional bonuses from this, because they'll be always getting that plus 25% damage. So you can basically accrue a lot of those bonuses, marked, sneaky. This gives you a very, very solid baseline, and you can pull off some crazy amounts of damage per turn if you're utilizing this trait. So that's probably another very nice, strong starter. If you do want to play around those golem synergies, because you have those extra new tomes, right, you will have the ability to link your units together. So if your units stand together, you can benefit a lot from both those new special skills and also defensive tactics and overwhelm tactics, right? This means that you might actually utilize, especially overwhelm tactics. Both of them are actually very strong if you're trying to just play this kind of approach. So that's also a valid choice if you don't want sneaky. I think taking like overwhelm tactics or defensive tactics is also a very, very solid approach. I would not take stuff like strong because you don't have a lot of units that will multi-attack here. So I would probably say that's not the strongest approach altogether. I like some extra other treats as well. I think Underground Adaptation is pretty cool because that's just a very strong early game. You can, dig in those rocks early if you start with the Underground Adaptation, and that is going to give you a lot of extra resources. So I do actually like starting Underground overall. I think that's a very strong kind of meta strategy. The other option is just taking Hardy and enjoying plus 8 HP. I don't think you can go wrong about this, to be honest. That's just really nice. 8 health is very, very solid altogether. So now let's go to society traits, and you basically have a couple of strong choices here. We did say that having a support unit at the start is a good idea. Therefore, having your powerful evokers here, that's not the worst choice in the world. That's actually a very decent trait overall. Having that extra combat casting point pool is good. And also you do get your free support unit to start with. That means that your early game that usually would suck is going to be slightly better. The other option, if you do have unlocked, if you have action locked Mana Addict, that's also very, very solid, I think. That's just extra. That's a very nice starting bonus with the attunement, right? You get extra lifesteal, so you have more sustain if you cast beneficial spells. And at the same time, you do have that support. I think that's a very worthy trade-off. Now, you might have two choices later. So you'd like to perhaps go towards the Chaos approach, or you might want to go towards the Materium approach, right? Both are very valid. So out of these, you have Reclaimers who will be obviously attacking lots of free cities, will be raising cities, pillaging provinces, right? Therefore, Reclaimers are really strong. You'll have a lot of good items to work with. And since you might have a hero that uses a musket, crafting your own musket makes it very strong. So I think that is not a very bad choice at all. Runesmiths, right? Runesmiths mean that your enchantment upkeep costs are cheaper. You also get a free unit. So again, I think that's a very, very good choice. Enchantments are going to be your bread and butter if you go the Materium path anyway. So that's a super, super good trait. Now we have the other option, which is obviously the society traits over here with the Chaos affinity, right? Prolific Swarmers, obviously, just cheaper upkeep. You will have better expansion. That's not a bad choice at all. Obviously, +1 rank for your tier 1 units, an extra tier 1 unit, lots of early power, something you'd probably want to have. Cannibals, I think that's not a bad trait overall. It gets a lot of bad rep, but I think actually sustaining yourself in combat, corpse eating is a free ability. You can just use it and then attack or something. So that's actually a very, very decent early trait. And obviously you also get mana and food per tier of non-magic origin units killed. So that's obviously faster growth. Not bad at all. Ruthless Raiders, if you're going to really commit to this style of attacking all the time, basically fighting a lot. This is +3 gold, +3 draft per the tier of units killed. So if you take a lot of fights all the time, this is just going to allow you for this kind of expansive growth. But at the same time, however, you come at this disadvantage because you do not have an extra unit. And finally, Chosen Destroyers, that's a very committed trait again, because it really changes the way you play. You are not able to obtain any cities, so you're just going to play with your single city that you start with. So portals are going to be more difficult to attain, of course, so moving around the map is going to be harder later. And early on, this is not really going to bring you any direct benefits. So it's a very risky thing to do, but if you feel like, going for this kind of approach, Chosen Destroyers might actually be something that's worth taking. The next thing that probably might be a good idea as well is kind of playing around the summons, right? So there is the trait called Mana Channelers, I believe, which is going to give you, so this is the one here, that's going to make your summons cheaper. So if you do go the Materium path and focus on summoning, this is actually a very good choice as well. And again, it nets you a free magic origin unit, so that's actually pretty cool as well. And it's minus 50% per mana for the mana cost of the units you summon, so that's a very, very, very solid starter too. And it's actually going to scale into the later game too, because obviously mana is something that you will be short on. So if you perhaps take Runesmiths and this, you'll never have mana issues at all. You'll be able to just build up this large mass of summoned units. So I do think that's also a fairly decent choice. Finally, Science of Evil will give you some extra draft if you go toward a very, very evil alignment. And again, you get an extra unit at the start, so you can't really complain about this, can you? So that's also decent if you're trying to play this very aggressive style and you're going towards the evil alignment, which as this culture will naturally gravitate towards anyway. I think that's a very, very solid choice. So let's just pick something random and go towards our tomes. And here you obviously have two choices, right? You might want to go towards Materium. I think you might want to go towards Chaos. Those seem to be very, very kind of beneficial to the way you might be playing this game. So let's maybe start with this kind of more default approach, which is Materium. So Materium, you have two choices. I would very strongly recommend you go with the Tome of Rock at the start, because you'll have the access to your Summon Lesser Stone Spirit skill, which is a fighter unit. It's a shield unit, in fact, which means that you are able to have this nice tank who can take some extra damage, who can soak up the incoming hits. That is very good, especially if you do start with a hero who is gonna be wielding a musket. That's definitely something that I would consider taking. The other choices are perhaps the Tome of Enchantment, which is another spear unit, not the best one, honestly, and Tome of Alchemy, which I went with the Afflictors and the Miasma, with this ability to actually spread this miasma, which does poison, bleed your enemies, and weaken them. That's not a bad choice at all. But again, I think that's actually quite decent. You'll have your first ranged unit before you go to Tier 2 City. But again, you'll probably want to push out the Afflictors later. Again, not the worst choice, I think, but this might require you to have a melee hero or a dragon hero. Otherwise, you might very much struggle early on in building up your initial forces. So in terms of enchantment tomes, in terms of the Materium tomes, that's it. Now, for your tomes that are concerned with Chaos, right, you might want to take the Tome of the Horde, because you again have a lot of extra units with Summon Irregulars, and you get the Houndmaster. The Houndmaster does actually have the ability to summon a Warhound, so that's an additional tank unit, and that's a Tier 2 range unit as well at its own right. So that's a very decent choice, I think. Tome of the Horde has a lot of cool abilities, and it is, again, it's gonna give you the strengthen. So if you go Mana Addicts, I think that's a very, very strong choice altogether. Now, on the other side of things, you might also consider going towards the Nature Tome, right? So you might want to perhaps take the Tome of the Beasts with the Wild Speakers and Summon Wild Animals. Again, you might have a lot of extra units this way, and this will give you a nice synergy. And you have Mark as Prey, which distracts and sunders defense. So again, distracts means that your enemies will be flanked. So if you did take the Sneaky Society trait, that is actually a very, very strong ally spell. Gives you a nice amount of focus. So that's also a very, very strong choice. And I think finally we can come towards our selections in terms of the leaders, right? So in terms of the leaders, you will have a couple of those options too. So you might want to go with a champion or with a Dragon Lord, I think. A Wizard King isn't necessarily the strongest choice here. A champion will obviously give you a lot of draft, and you're trying to mass your army, so that's very, very important. And you'll have a lot of extra resources to spend. With those war spoils, you can build extra cannons if your economy affords it, right? So if your production actually affords it. So that is not the worst choice at all. And again, you are also getting faster experience, so you'll be relying on units. That's a very good way to kind of capitalize on this, right? I do think that the champion archetype is very strong. The other choice is going to be the dragon, because dragons are really strong at frontlining and doing damage and just provide you with those kind of intangible benefits, right? This obviously comes at the cost of 30 gold upkeep, but you will very easily make up for this with items in your hold, right? So overall, again, a very, very decent choice. I think Dragon Lords are quite strong, and they will be able to just kind of frontline for you early on and then just kind of shift towards something else. Again, champion, you can, if you have your hero, you can obviously, if you have like a humanoid hero, right, not a dragon, you can obviously start as a melee hero and then transition in towards that musketeer later on in the game when you do have the opportunity to do so, right, when you have the right composition that kind of allows you to play around that, right? So you have a lot of choices here. I would definitely say that champion is my personal preference, but Dragon Lord sounds like a very, very good starter as well. So, to sum things up, Reavers are a very cool culture, though they do have those very pronounced early game weaknesses, and you will have to try to fight your way around them, of course, especially that as you kind of evolve this, as you kind of keep building your traits, you will find a lot of those cool things there. Just to kind of note, I think going towards the Chaos affinity will give you a lot of those benefits towards, plundering, pillaging enemy cities, so that might be probably the way to go, which I have not explored myself, but obviously Materium affinity also is, I think, universally a very, very strong choice with a lot of those passive, easy to attain bonuses that it provides you with. Now, if you did enjoy yourselves watching this video, please consider following me on Twitch, subscribing to me on YouTube, and checking out my other videos. That is gonna be it for me today, guys, so see you around in the next videos and episodes.